what I'm going to do is give you an intro into JQ, and then Dennis and Toby talk about Ansible DB, and under the hood, it's got some elements of JQ there in terms of using that to query JSON objects, and JQ, like I was saying, is used for manipulating JSON objects. So you think about it as an input and an output. So you input the JSON object into JQ, and it provides you an output in a specific format. So some of the topics I'm going to cover today, I'm going to tell you a bit about myself. I'll talk about JSON. What is JSON? And forgive me if I'm preaching to the converted, but I'll just tell you a bit more about JSON in case you're not aware of it. Then I'll talk about some essential JQs, so things you need to sort of know to deal with JQ and to make JQ queries. We'll talk about two operators that are built into JQ as well. There are a lot of operators in JQ, and you can also create your own functions, but we'll just talk about two. And then we'll go through some demo just to show you what JQ can do. I know you guys want to know what I listen to on Spotify, so you get the opportunity to sort of listen to some, well, have a look at some of the data I can get from my Spotify. Okay, so about myself. I work as a cloud middleware and database platform engineer. I was working at Nomura as of this month, and I finished about a week ago, actually. So actually, on Monday was my last day at Nomura. I've also worked at Vodafone, and I'm going to be starting employment at Millennium. I've been in financial services for almost 10 years, which has been exciting, and I really like finance as a whole. My hobbies are golf, technology, and investing. I do write articles, but I haven't published all of them. I do have a couple published on Medium, so if you're interested in some of my stuff, then you can look at Medium. And there's a bunch of some of the things I've achieved over the years, I suppose. Now, let's talk about JSON and JQ. Like I said, forgive me if I'm preaching to the converted, but when you think about JSON, what do you think of? I think about something that's lightweight. I think about flat files, think about website APIs. So a lot of websites nowadays, especially APIs, return JSON as the response. I think about relationships, so relationships within data. And I also think about data analysis as well, so trying to extract information from data. And finally, nested data as well. So we've got a bunch of different things here, and nested data is another sort of complication to JSON. In the bottom right-hand corner, we've got a JSON object there, and it's got a bunch of keys and values. As we can see, you've got name key, member key, members key, modified date, and all that stuff. And within the members key, we've got an array there as well. And that array also has a nested JSON object within it. So this just gives you sort of a rough idea of what JSON is and how it sort of works. So it's quite a nice sort of nested object. Now, this then brings us to JQ. So what exactly is JQ? Well, JQ is used for querying JSON. So I call it the JSON whisperer. And you can use it to slice, filter, map, and transform JSON. I'm sure there's probably some system administrators on this call today. So, and you're probably used to using sed and awk and grep, which are very, very good and powerful tools for sure. If you've ever tried to sort of query, get an API response from somewhere which is not formatted properly, and then try to grep the data that you need from that, you might decide you want another tool. But JQ is great when it comes to this. It's written in portable C, and it has zero runtime dependencies. I've got like a nice sort of icon there just to show you what you can do with JQ. So you can filter, slice, map, transform data. So you think of it as an input. So JQ ingests data and it outputs it based on whatever filters you pass. And the great thing about it is the original data source remains untouched. So you're not actually, making changes to the actual original data source, which is also very good. Now, what are the essentials? If you're not familiar with JQ, I'll give you sort of essentials in terms of Swiss Army knife things that you need when you're sort of making a JQ query. And if you are a JQ veteran, then forgive me for going through this. Right, I've broken the main essentials down into these 4 different things, and you can do a lot with them. We've got the identifier. So if you've got a JSON blob that is not pretty and you just want to make it pretty, just pretty print, taking that input and then pretty print the output, you use the identifier. Now, if you want to select an element within that JSON blob, you would use the object identifier. Now, if that object also has a list within it, like we talked about earlier on, you'd use an array index. So you select an index item from a list of an array. Also, you've got the generic object index as well, which is similar to the object identifier. That's the one with the string there, by the way. So if you use that as well, that's another way to sort of extract items from a JSON object. And then you've got the object iterator. So over there, and what that does is it filters, it basically loops. It's kind of like a one-line for loop or one-line iterator, and you could just basically go through each item within a JSON object and just return that. You've got the comma, where it filters the same input and then it concatenates the output. So like I mentioned before, you think about JQ as input and output. And what you're doing is you're filtering the same input, extracting whatever data it is from that input, and then you're adding a comma there and you're doing the same thing. So with the same input, you're filtering that data, and then you can then respond, you can then provide that information, concatenating all the objects or elements you've retrieved from that particular data. You've got the pipe. So if you're, like I mentioned earlier, if you're a systems administrator, you've got pipe where you basically, it combines two filters. So you filter an object, and then whatever's, the result of that filter gets passed into the next element or next section of that, and then you can perform more filtering. And finally, you've got the array slicing. If you played around with lists, then you want to extract a range of items within a list, then the array slicing feature is also a very, very useful feature to use. So what does a JQ query look like? I've got 4 different examples here. So I've got a data set which has got first name, it's got elements, so keys, first name, last name, age, and date of birth. And we've got some basic JQ queries there. The first example is just basically querying the first name of each element within the JQ, within the JSON object. And we're using a bunch of different things there. So we're using the iterator, which we talked about earlier on, and then we're also using the object identifier. So we're using the key to basically select the first names from that data set there. The second is doing the same thing. And this time what we're doing is we're also wrapping it in square brackets. So transforming that data into a list. So we talked about JQ being used to transform data. What we've done there is we've transformed the data set from a bunch of different JSON objects or JSON statements to just a list with 2 results in there. And then example 3 is another example there where we're actually using the comma separator. This time around, we're passing the same input there, using an iterator, we're passing the same input, selecting the first name, and then we're passing the same input to the next. So then we apply the comma, and then we're passing the same input to that state. And this time around, we're selecting the age. And so as you can see, the great thing about it is JQ returns all these different elements in order. So first of all, it iterates through the JSON there, and selects all the different first names that are listed. So you've got Bob and Bruce. And then that input is also passed into the second section where you've got the age, and it's doing the same thing as well. It's iterating through that and selecting all the different ages there. And then we've got ourselves a nice list there which has all the names and the ages all in order. So technically you could potentially say, right, Bob there is 16, but you wouldn't want to do that, which then leads us to example 4, where this time around I'm transforming that data, but also adding meaning and forming it into a key value pair there. So now we know that Bob is 16. So those are some of the simple, these are some simple JQ queries just to get yourself warmed up. Then we've got operators. JQ does a lot of different things. There are so many operators. It does addition, subtractions, lots of different things, but I've decided to just select 2 of them. You've got the select operator and you've got the map operator. Select basically does what it says on the tin. It selects items. So for instance, you've got the list of different JSON objects there, and you've got genre as a key, and you've got the type of music, so funky house there, smooth funky, and all these different stuff there. And what you're trying to do is you want to select just the elements within that list that have funky in them. And what we're doing is we're applying a generic sort of iterator, and then we're selecting the genre from the key. We're piping that. So the result of that genre, we're piping it. And then what we're doing is out of that result, we're then selecting funky. So anything with the value of funky, we're selecting that, and then we're outputting that into JSON, outputting a JSON result as a result of that. And then, with a map function, that basically just runs a filter for each element in the input array. So we've got an array there with lots of different elements. And what we're doing is we're basically running a filter through that. In addition to that, we're using the select operator to then just grab anything there that's got song as a key. And as you can see there, we've got an output. Right, so now let's actually try some of this. I know there's a lot of stuff to sort of digest there, but let's attempt to do a demo just to give you guys an insight into how JQ works. I'm going to switch to my terminal now. And please let me know if I'm going too fast. I can definitely slow things down. Now, where is my terminal?
No, it's all good so far, Solomon.
Great, thanks.
You've got a big head on my screen, though.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Carry on.
Yeah. Okay, so what I'm going, can you see my terminal, by the way? Or,
yes, I can.
Okay, cool. I was doing some
It's a little small. You can make it bigger.
Sure. Thank you very much. I will do that. Let me know if that's big enough, or I need to go bigger. Do I need to go bigger?
It's good.
Yeah.
It's pretty good.
Yes. Okay. Okay. So I've got a list of JSON texts, some JSON objects in there. So just cat one simple. This is a very simple one. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with simple items or simple JSON objects, and then we're going to go into slightly complicated ones. Not necessarily complicated, but just a lot more data in there. And the way I think of it is I'm asking questions. So the first question I'm going to ask is, I want to get all the first names, right? And what I'm doing here is I'm applying the iterator, and I'm also selecting the object identifier. So I'm selecting the key first name. And if I run that, it returns Bob and Bruce. Yeah, nice, simple query. Okay. And also, actually, so there is, if you guys are familiar with Docker, there is actually a Docker container that you might be able to use to sort of try this out yourself. So if you've got Docker running on your machine, you can potentially just get this container called, I'm not even sure how you pronounce that, Omega, something like that. You could do that, and you just download that container and literally run this command here, as you can see, and it will do the same thing. So it's a nice one. So if you haven't got JQ installed, there's a Docker container there for you. And that basically just prints out all the objects, and you can sort of start to filter it as well if you really wanted to. So I can just copy this here, and that's all done from Docker container. Yeah, and technically you should, yeah, there you go. But that's when I do it with my normal screen. So let's go back to what we were doing before. It's all pretty nicely formatted. Okay, so let's carry on. Now I'm going to ask it another question. So we're going to say, so these are sort of recapping some of the examples that we talked about in the slide earlier on. So now we're going to say, get all the first name and age elements and insert the output into a list. So that's what we're going to do. So we want all the first names. And so let me just show you again the data that we're playing around with so that you're not confused. So we want to get the first names and the, sorry, just a minute. I've lost my train of thought. There we go. So yeah, I want to get all the first name and age elements and insert them into, sorry. Just a minute. Which query did we do? So we got all the first names. So let's try it. Let's get all the age as well and put that into a list. So we want to get all the ages and add that into a list. So let's copy and paste that. And what we're doing is we're iterating through the elements there. and we're selecting age, but also to convert the output into a list, we're also adding square brackets there as well. And if we run that, we've got ourselves a list. If I took out the square brackets, if I took out square brackets, we will have just the output there. So this is what we talk about when we say we're transforming data. So we're transforming that object there, and we're basically selecting the data that we want. Those are some nice, simple queries. Again, we're going to do one more using that same piece of data. This time around, we want to provide a key value pair. So you're probably seeing something that's a bit different here, which is we're using the iterator. So we're iterating through the element. We're also adding a pipe there as well. So we're filtering the output of that. And additionally, on top of that, what we're also doing is we're creating a dictionary. So as you can see with the curly brackets there. And this is actually quite useful, this bracket. So by doing that as well, we're iterating. So we're selecting all the first names there. We're creating a colon, and we're doing the same thing for age as well. And what this does is it actually just it provides us a nice funky dictionary there, just selecting, creating a key value pair of the name and the age. So now from this, transformed the data, you've transformed this nice, not too bad, simple query, I've transformed that into just, a nice readable dictionary there. Just selecting the specific elements that we want. What I could do now, let me sort of take it up a notch a bit, I suppose, and use some of the operators. So we talked about operators earlier on, and what I've got is I've got another example here. So I've got this, we talked about the funky and all that stuff, some funky music genre. What I can do here is, like we've done earlier on, is we can iterate through this. We can select genre as a key, and then as part of that, we want to just select the values that only have funky within them. By running that, so we've got that information, we've transformed it, we've got genres, and we've got all the ones that have got funky in them. So funky house, smooth funky, and funky jazz. Now, the moment that you've all been waiting for, you want to know about my Spotify music. So we've got a bit more. So this is a larger data set. Albums. So we've got this huge data set here, which has got a list of albums and things. And looking at this is intimidating, to be honest. I look at this and I'm bored already. How do we actually extract any meaning out of this data? Luckily, we've got JQ. So let's start seeing how powerful and quick JQ is. And what we're going to do is we're going to ask JQ some questions again. Now, how many albums are there in that data set? 3. So out of that data set that we've just seen there, what we're doing here is we're just selecting albums, and then we're using another operator called length to basically count all the elements in that. So if you look at how, if you know how much stuff is in that, out of that, JQ has managed to just provide us with a simple answer, which is, which is 3. Very nice, very powerful, and that was pretty quick as well. Let's ask it another question. So what are the names of the albums in the data set? Okay, don't judge my music taste, but this is what. There we go. So what I'm doing again is I'm selecting the object albums, I'm iterating through that, and I'm just selecting the names. And out of this nasty piece of JSON, I'm able to select all the different names of the albums. So we're really dealing with 3 albums here in this data set. And that's the data set. And that's the number of albums that we're dealing with. Let's do some more fun stuff, I suppose. Another question is, get the names of the songs on the first album. So this is a bit different. So we've got lots of data there, but we actually just want to select, we're using an array index identifier here to select just the name of the tracks on the first album. And there you go. So, we've got the albums, the first object there, array identifier, selecting tracks, we're iterating through the items, and then we're selecting the name. So let me just see if I can show you what we're doing, what the JSON looks like. It's quite nice, fun JSON. So we've got a list of objects there, and there's some tracks somewhere. Tracks is actually a nested piece of JSON in there. Ooh, maybe it might be pretty to see. Let's see. Artists. Okay, you know what? There's way too much JSON object there. I don't want to bore you guys to death. But yeah, that's kind of showing you a bit of what else we can do. Another question that we can ask is, we want to get all the information. We want to get some information for the first album. What we want to do is we want to get the name, the release date, the popularity, the total tracks, and the album name. So, and we want to do this just for the first album in my data set. There we go. So, and we're also going to wrap this in a list as well. So what we're doing is we're using the iterator there, selecting the first element, using an array identifier there, selecting the first element within that that particular list of arrays. We're also piping the result of that, and then through the result of that, we're selecting the name. So if you remember what the comma does as well, so the comma does, it basically passes the same input into the next stage. So we're passing the same input here, and this time around we're selecting the release date. We're passing the same input here, and this time we're selecting the popularity, and we're doing the same thing. And if we run that, it gives us that. So that's the first album. That's the name, that's the release date, that's the popularity of the album, and that's the number of tracks in that album. And now, so that's just doing it for the first item in the list. If you want to do this for all the items in there, we could take away that array index identifier there. And there we go. So the great thing about this is that, as I mentioned before, it returns the values in order. So the order that you sort of request for it here is the same order that it's returned. So technically, this release date matches, that popularity, and that release date matches that popularity. And likewise, I think you kind of get the gist. Let's do two more, and then I will end it there and take any questions if you have any. Now we want to get the information from 3 and create a new JSON with it. So this is nice and this is useful, and this, it might be useful, I think, but we want to make it look a bit nicer and transform that data based on all that stuff that we've gathered. So we apply something like this, and suddenly we've gone from, let me just sort of show you what we've done here. Suddenly we've gone from all this mumbo jumbo to this lovely, nice, fancy JSON. And we can do whatever we need to do there. So you've got key value pairs, you've got 3 albums there, Tron Legacy reconfigured, and got the release date and popularity. Apparently Discovery is a very, very popular album as well. Actually, one final one as well. So, I mean, now we've got all the albums there, we might as well throw in all the tracks as well that are on those albums whilst we're at it, right? So let's see what tracks are there. So there we go. So not only do we now have the name of the album there, we've got the release dates, popularity, and now we've even got the tracks. So, I mean, maybe some of you can relate to some of the music here and identify which tracks that you want out of the large. Let me just show you one more time just to show you how ugly it is. But it just shows you the power of JQ and what you can do with it. That's the data we've got, which is very, very long, and it takes a long time to scroll through it. And that's what we sort of generated, after doing that. But yeah, so I've just been messing around with JQ just to try and get an understanding of how it's used. I found it very, very interesting actually, because it's something I never really used, but so since Dennis sort of drew my attention to it, I start to see the power in it. And I know for sure that Dennis and Toby will be telling you a bit more about it, and they'll be using that in their Ansible DB presentation. I will now be handing over to Dennis and Toby. Thank you very much.